Hey guys, so it's day 187. So if you've been following number-wise, that means that I'm past the halfway point. Happy dance. Anyway, so I was able to think about what I heard and learned from Poverty Inc. over this last week. And actually, I got to write it into a book that I'm trying to write. And essentially, I came up for 10 tips for how to best implement giving to charities and for charities to be implemented. Please forgive me, I haven't actually memorized all of these yet, as I just wrote them a couple of days ago, but I want to read you what I've come up with. So number 1, work with people who have boots on the ground and are working with the local businesses. Some charities and NGOs are far too removed from the actual people they're working with. This leads them to provide solutions that aren't long-lasting or, worse, are already being implemented by local businesses. The classic example of this is rice. Governments and nonprofits flood an economy with free rice, which, on the surface, seems like a very humane and humanitarian thing to do. But then the rice farmers have no ability to make a living off of the rice. All of their rice crops are now essentially without worth. It is much better for nonprofits to locally source the materials they wish to distribute, thus keeping the local economy going. But it's easier to say than to do, especially if the nonprofit isn't boots on the ground. It's next to impossible to see problems you're causing if you're just sitting in another country brainstorming what you feel the best solution is, instead of being there with the people, asking them what can help them in their need. Number 2, work with those who are building the ability to fish, not just giving away fish. There are plenty of ways to spur on local businesses. Compassion International gives some of their project children's families a Water for Life bucket, which many families have turned into a small money-making business. Microfinancing has grown wildly popular as a way to help people out of their poverty. These small microloans allow a person to start a small business. It could be a measly 2 chickens, which then provide eggs to be sold continuously. There are plenty of enterprising people who just need a little help in order to get their business up and running. A new need that I found out recently is the need for larger loans. Not massive loans, but not microloans either. These are the loans that local businessmen and women need in order to grow their already flourishing enterprises and allow for larger warehouses, more equipment, more inventory. This allows them to hire more people, again boosting the economy. But due to the fact that they don't have property, often due to rough local laws, they don't have collateral to put down on a loan. Thus, they're stuck in the small business category and are unable to expand a business which is already doing so well. In my opinion, this is where an enterprising young social entrepreneur could leave their footprint. Who knows, maybe that'll be me. Number 4, work with those who have local organizations or groups implementing the system rather than Westerners. It's very easy for local people to become disempowered because the help they are receiving is coming from Westerners. It causes a feeling of dependency. It causes a sense of shame. It's better if the actual program side of things is implemented by indigenous locals rather than Westerners. Case in point, Compassion International. When you reach a compassion project where they implement the programming, you don't see a Compassion International sign. You won't see Westerners. You'll see only the local church. The local church works with the regional program director who oversees X amount of church projects. This allows for the boots on the ground approach rather than cookie cutter, as the local pastor can much better know the needs of the project than someone behind a desk in the West. Additionally, it allows the people to be blessed by locals within the local church rather than receiving handouts from Westerners. Number 4, work with those that are empowering the people, especially in the area of law. People are very enterprising. After you get through the initial necessary level of relief after an earthquake, tsunami, etc., people are often very capable of getting on their own feet if they are given the opportunity. Unfortunately, one of the hardest hurdles to people starting their own business is in the area of law. If law of ownership or personal property isn't in place, it's nearly impossible to get past the handouts and start working for yourself. If you have to buy the same plot of land multiple times in order to farm on it, and yet it is never truly yours, then there isn't much incentive to continue pursuing farming. I really love International Justice Mission as they work in the field of law to help everyone play by the same set of rules. They work to help those who have had their property stolen by force as well as helping those who are stuck in human trafficking, whether sex or labor in nature. These laws need to be enforced and need to have precedence before people will begin paying attention to them. Until these laws are able to be enforced, it will be a rule of the jungle system where anything goes as long as you have the force to back it up, which the people who need the help don't. Number 5. Work with those who seek to break broken systems further up in the chain, such as water. I want to tell you a story about a fictional girl. Her name is Anya. Anya is the child of a very poor set of parents. Her dad tries to get work wherever he can, and her mother does everything she can for the family. Anya's job is to get the water every day, but the water is an hour away and isn't even clean when she gets there. Every day she takes her family jug and lugs it an hour to the river. She shoos away the local cattle that drink from the same river as well, then fills the jug with water. She then begins the hour walk back to the village. She doesn't mind the daily trip, except that this trip keeps her from school. She can't get an education because she doesn't have the time or energy after such a long trip each day. The water isn't even clean, and sometimes she gets very sick from drinking it, but she's luckier than some other children she knows, as she always gets better eventually. Unfortunately, when she is older and the family is going through hard times, she has nothing to offer the family other than her body. She allows her family to sell her to a local trafficker, accepting the fate she knows is coming. I wish this wasn't a true story, but this is often the sad reality in some countries. Sure, you could go in and rescue the girl from traffickers later on in the system, or you could send medicine to help Anya when she's sick. But what if you could solve the system earlier on in the system? What if you were able to build a well or a rain collector or some other water provider system for Anya's village? This way she can go to school and get an education. This way her friends might not get sick from waterborne illnesses. This way, when the family is in need, she has the skills, education, and ability to provide for them. The further up in the system you can provide change, often in the area of infrastructure or education, the more good it can do as the person's life unfolds, becoming a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle. While these costs may be greater on the front end, it's harder to drill a well than merely give some kids medicine. It is much more efficient in the long run. Side note, when working with water charities, make sure they are focusing on sustainability and education on using the system they provide. When Westerners don't incorporate this education and sustainability training into the creation of a project, the local inhabitants don't see it as their own, and it often goes unused, like when you see some rusty farming equipment in an African field because the indigenous people were given it but never really wanted it, asked for it, or taught how to upkeep it. 6 is pray. Pray for wisdom as you're making the decision on which charity to invest in. Ask God to make it clear to you which way He'd have your money go. In addition, after you've chosen a charity, pray for that charity and the work that they do. Prayer is powerful, and while this might seem like a small step, it isn't. And I'm feeling very hypocritical right now as I don't do this nearly as much as I should. Number 7. Use charitynavigator.com to view their financials. While you're trying to decide between different charities that follow the same sort of system, one way to make a good choice is to check out Charity Navigator Score. This website takes the charity's publicly available financial information and sees how much they spend on admin, marketing, as opposed to the money spent on the actual program, money being spent on the people they help. More than once I've been surprised that a charity which I thought was spot on had less than perfect financials and scored a relatively low score on the site. There are always exceptions, but this website is very helpful when doing the last bit of research on a charity you're considering. But Charity Navigator doesn't say anything about how dependency building or effective an actual program is, and that's where you have to do some research and think through whether this is building dependency or not, which we'll get to. Number 8. Don't lean too heavily on Western demand. This one isn't as much a hard and fast rule rather than a premonition of what is to come. When watching Poverty Inc., the documentary highlighted a charity that was helping African women bring beads, earrings, necklaces, etc. to the West to be sold. This was a great system allowing the parents of children to provide for them, giving jobs to those that needed them. The problem was when they were talking about where they were selling these beads to. They listed out Disney, certain musicians, and other contracts. This is a great thing, so much demand for the product. But what happens after those contracts dry up, when Disney decides to go with something else or someone else? I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but that it is just one of the problems with it. The other problem is that once this single nonprofit has these contracts, no one else can have them. So while a few nonprofits could be doing really great with this system, the system itself is now less sustainable for others. The supply can't grow because the demand is static and firmly footed in the West. By the way, I'm mostly talking about non-consumable goods such as earrings, necklaces, things like that. I think it's a completely different ballpark when you get into coffee or things of that nature, which I think there's great ability to create a system from. This Western demand can do a nonprofit good in getting its feet on the ground, but eventually the demand for these easily made goods will need to be able to stand on their own local economy, not leaning on the West and its fickle trends and fashions. Again, not a bad thing, but it isn't going to be sustainable in the long run and won't allow additional patrons into its exclusive contracts later on. The key is finding something that can be locally made but also has local demand in order to optimize sustainability. Number 9. After a disaster, relief is okay, but this needs to grow into rehabilitation and development. This concept is talked about at length within When Helping Hurts. It talks about how, immediately after a disaster, the people need resources given to them. Local businesses can't provide for the needs in the timing and quantity that are needed. This is when sending in food, bottled water, hygiene supplies, etc. is necessary. But after a certain amount of time, it isn't a hard and fast date, shocker, these relief efforts need to slow to a crawl and then stop completely. The relief allows local businesses to get back on their feet, to build up inventory again. But as we've talked about before, if relief keeps on flowing into the country for free, these businesses can't get their feet under them. Who's going to buy locally made clothing if nonprofits are constantly dumping in American textile goods at no cost? This can be seen most clearly with Haiti. Years and years and years after the earthquake, there are still hundreds, even thousands of nonprofits working to provide relief work within the country rather than coming alongside businesses in order to help them flourish and grow the local economy. Lastly, number 10, dependence must be avoided at all cost. Dependence is like the plague. Once you've got it, you can't get rid of it, and eventually you'll waste away from it. If people don't feel empowered or the need to be empowered because everything is coming to them for free, the human psyche will atrophy into a state of apathy. This is a more general principle to work through than those previously, but is the bedrock upon which the foundation of many of the previous tips are built. If you can build empowerment instead of building dependency, you're doing great things. So again, these aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, but these are the ones that after doing a significant amount of research in my time trying to learn what actually helps people, When Helping Hurts, Poverty Inc., Dead Aid. These are some of the best practices for charities and nonprofits to be implementing. And so if you're considering giving to a nonprofit, you should probably make sure that they are following these tips. It's not exclusive. I'm sure someone out there has a much better list than me, but these are the 10 that I came up with just from my own research as I've been going through what Poverty Inc. talked about and things like that. Thanks for watching. I know this was a long one. Share it with a friend. Let me know if you have any good tips when giving to a charity, and check this out.
Just woke up, but still cute.